Happy Thursday. It is that time for another Thursday Thoughts. Kevin Homer, how you doing today?
Doing great. I mean, are you looking out your window? It looks a little dark where you are right now, but if you look out the window, how can you not be doing great? It's beautiful out. Finally, it is in the 60s. It's sunny. The Sixers are back. We took a couple days off. The Sixers are back. Here I am. I'm wearing short sleeves. I haven't done that for a while.
Right. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I'm actually going to conduct the rest of my meetings outside today. I wanted to take advantage of my new mic, as you see my new buddy here, and I couldn't really do that outside. So Thursday Thoughts outside. My first Zoom in with Zach, that might be outside later on.
I like it.
But yeah, man, I'm excited for today. We have an awesome discussion on DEI for entrepreneurs and small business. I love our guest like a sister, so I can't wait to introduce her to everybody. But yeah, I think we just hop right into it and have a good time. And quick shout out, Women's History Month. The best I could do is I busted out my Miss Potato Head coffee mug, so she'll be our co-star for today. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday Thought. I'm Zach James, here with Kevin Homer. We are Navitas Marketing, and super excited to bring you another installment of our webcast where we chat with thought leaders, industry experts, and all-around amazing people about just about everything. And today we're talking diversity, equity, and inclusion, which for a lot of folks, they didn't really know what that was prior to this year. It's a hot button issue. It's something that's very important to me personally. I know it is to you too, Kevin, and I'm excited to chat about it. But yeah, how are you doing today, man?
Doing great. And just as you said, I mean, you summed that up perfectly. I mean, this is such an important topic. We've had some great conversations this year. We had some great conversations last year in season 1 of Thursday Thoughts. Great topics, great speakers. No slight to everyone else. This is probably the one I'm most excited about. And this is just such an important topic. And I know we've got such a special, great guest. And I don't even want to keep talking. We just got to introduce her. Let's do it.
Let's do it. And just a quick heads up for the folks who are watching, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, make sure you leave us some comments. We'll share them during the show. And if you have questions, you can also just give them to us in the comments and we'll try to get to them during our Q&A. But without any further ado, I want to introduce you to my good friend, colleague, buddy, partner, Derelice Lyons. So let me tell you a little bit about Daralyse. Derelice Lyons, aka the Transformational Storyteller, is a journalist, an actor, an activist. She has written more than 24 full-length books. That's more than 24 books. All right, a handful of short stories, countless articles. She's performed in various plays and in improv comedy shows. She's a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and a summa cum laude graduate of NYU with a double major in English and religious studies and a minor in history. She is passionate about exposing the painful side of history, the side that is not written by oppressors. After writing an award-winning children's book called I'm Mixed about embracing her biracial, multi-ethnic heritage, Daralyse found her passion and her purpose educating others about the need to embrace all aspects of themselves. Since then, she has written and spoken extensively on the subject of diversity. Her perspective is one that looks to acknowledge the past while refusing to become incapacitated by it. As a biracial, multi-ethnic, and sexually fluid woman, she is uniquely empowered to use her seemingly disparate background as a catalyst for cross-culture understanding. You can find Daralyse at DereliceLyons.com. Also, her podcast at DemystifyingDiversityPodcast.com. So without further ado, super excited to introduce you all to my good friend, Derelice Lyons. How you doing today, Daralyse?
Oh, so great. What a heartwarming introduction, Zach and Kevin. It's so great to be here with you. It's so great to be here with your audience, and I'm just honored. It's it's a gift.
Awesome. We're so happy to have you. So for those who don't know, I've actually been working with Derelice for years on her personal brand. I helped her work on just kind of getting her name out there as that actor and author and a speaker. And she recently brought me into the fold with her diversity podcast, which I'm super excited to be a part of. I hope everyone goes and follows it and checks it out. I'm going to make sure I have that scrolling at the bottom of the screen soon so you guys can learn about it. But it's a really great to have her here because the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot of folks that don't really know what that means. We are going to have her kind of define that for us as well. But a lot of folks kind of think that if you're by yourself, if you let's say you're an entrepreneur and you don't really have a team, that it doesn't really pertain to you. You know, learning about DEI or becoming, educated in that space isn't as much of a factor, which I'm a firm proponent that that's not the case. And of course, Daralyse is going to tell us today why that's not the case. But in order to kind of kick things off, Daralyse, why don't you give us sort of your overview of what DEI is?
Yeah, so diversity is such a big and broad topic, right? It's so much more. I think sometimes people hear that and they think it just has to do with race, right? And it's so much bigger. So diversity is all of the differences that make people who they are, right? And all of us have a number of different intersecting identities. So I'm a woman, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm biracial, so I'm Black and white, and then there's all the different ethnicities that make that up. I'm a writer, so like there's all these facets to who I am as a person. And then the same would be true for you, Zach, all these facets to who you are, Kevin, all these facets to who you are, and everybody sort of has that, right? And so when we look at diversity, it's all of the richness that makes people who we are. And then it's the various communities of which we're a part, and then how our identities kind of interact within ourselves and interact within our communities. And so when I define it that way, right, and you start thinking about, well, why is diversity important for entrepreneurs? It becomes very clear, like, oh, well, if I can look beyond just myself and my own identities and my own communities, maybe I can better serve my customer base. Maybe I can find areas of overlap with other people. Like there's a richness that comes from diversity, but I think it starts with broadening our definition of diversity to be much, much more than just Black, white, male, female, all the binaries that people tend to sort of go to as identity markers.
100%. And, I do know a lot of folks that might think diversity is Black and white. And, I always kind of had a bigger appreciation, but I didn't even know the full scope until I met you and kind of learned a lot more about it. So, again, one thing for folks to know, if you have questions regarding DEI, please shoot them in the comments. We'll try to get to them after we have this little chat here. But let's kind of kick things off. So the first thing in relation to, diversity and how it pertains to small business and entrepreneurs is really defining these terms. So, and this is sort of a basic definition of entrepreneur, one who organizes, manages, and assumes the risk of a business or enterprise. But feel free to dive a little more into that in terms of definition.
Yeah, right. So I guess the way that I look is at entrepreneurship, and it's so broad, right? So it's a person kind of taking on that business risk. But what does that mean? So typically an entrepreneur they'll either see a need in the marketplace or a community that they want to serve, or something that they're good at, a particular skill set, right? And then they'll parlay that into a business, into whether it be a service-based business or products that they're selling. And so so entrepreneurship is really all about innovation. It's about adaptability. It's about ideas. It's about serving other people. It's about being willing to be flexible. I used to work in corporate America. I worked for a hedge fund. I worked in finance. I did all that stuff. And in those arenas, really, independent thinking is important, but it's not as critical as when you're an entrepreneur and your livelihood and then the people that you support depends on your ability to adapt and to think broadly. And, we're seeing this so much in COVID right now, right? Like the companies that have not been able to pivot have been devastated by what's happening in terms of this global pandemic. But even, beyond that, right? Because how often does a global pandemic happen? Beyond that, if we just think about, which companies tend to really make it in the long run, which entrepreneurs tend to be successful, it's the people who can think beyond whatever narrow focus they started with, right? And so diversity helps us to do that.
Got it. Got it. Now let's talk a little bit about that definition of diversity. We have the condition of having or being composed of different elements, variety, which again, I was not fully aware of the variety and extent before, but especially the inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races or cultures in a group or organization. And the second definition, an instant of being composed of different elements or qualities, an instance of being diverse. So how do you kind of compare those two definitions in the correlation between the two?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think diversity is broad, right? And so both things are happening simultaneously. I love giving examples because I think we learn by stories and we learn by application. And so, so one example, I went to a conference recently. I went to the Creating Change conference, and something that they had was they had closed captioning, like was just offered, right? Widespread. It was just offered to everyone on every platform. At any time, you know, we could opt in to closed captioning or not. So that's an example of a place that made it super inclusive, right? If someone had, for whatever reason, like maybe they weren't able to hear what was being said, or perhaps they process better as a visual learner, or, you know, whatever reason, right? Just being able to kind of create that space where it said, okay, come on in, the door is open, there is access for you if you are a person who would rather read than hear what's being said. Or and so I took that and I thought, oh my gosh, like why didn't I think of that, right? And then now have equipped my own work, my own platform with the ability to have closed captioning. So like that's one example of exposure, right, to a different way of doing things. Being willing as an entrepreneur to say, like I want my work to be more accessible. I want it to be more inclusive, and think of how many more people I can serve if I, you know, spend $20 a month or whatever for this service that now allows me to have closed captioning. And now maybe I can interview individuals with disabilities who might have, you know, a hearing impairment or what, like it just makes me a broader, more expansive person, and it makes the work that I do better. And so that's just an example, right, of how exposure to a different way of doing something, like kind of it opens our mind and expands our perspective beyond our own limited lens. Another thing is language, right? That if we don't know, I mean, how often do people use the word guys, right? They'll come into a room and be like, hey guys, what's up, right? But if you really think about that, well, like who is in the room, right? Like, is it an entirely male audience that you're talking to? Like, who are you trying to include and incorporate? And so I think diversity offers a mirror wherein we can really see ourselves and our behaviors reflected back, and then think about like, oh, is this the person I want to be? Is this the brand I want to be? Is this the message I want, you know, my business to convey? So I think the ability to be surrounded by variety, whether that's variety of different people that we're interacting with, or just different media that we're consuming, different sources, right? Because you can be a diverse business as an individual operating as one. Like you can still run a diverse and inclusive business. So I think it's important to think about these things as making us better and broader. Because then diversity becomes less about that thing I'm doing for other people and more about the things that I'm doing, like, because it's right, because it calls to my soul, because it's important to me, and because I can see the value added both to my life and to the community that I serve.
No, that makes so much sense. And, you know, the interesting thing, which again, I don't want small businesses or entrepreneurs to look at it from this lens first, but by having that element of diversity included in your offering, you are reaching a larger base of potential customers. And, you know, even though that shouldn't be the paramount, you know, element, that is a benefit to actually embracing diversity. I definitely think that's a perk that, again, I don't think folks should lead with, but it is on the back end one of the great reasons or elements that kind of plays a factor.
Well, it's funny that you would say that, Zach. Like, I guess I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm trained as a yoga teacher, and so like I have a lot of experience, right? With like in yoga, it's a practice and it's a discipline. And if we do the daily discipline, you kind of start to just feel those benefits infiltrating every element of your life. And I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is the same. And so even, I think sometimes even if people do enter that space from a lens of like profitability, I think they might be really surprised by how many more incredible things happen in their lives. Just as if someone enters it from a space of like ethics or morality, they'll probably be very surprised to find out how much more profitable they are. So I kind of just encourage people to practice diversity as a skill set for whatever reason. And then we really do feel those physical, mental, spiritual, psychological benefits, but whatever gets someone to start doing this work, go right ahead, like, and do it and be pragmatic about it, because your life will get better, and your ability to be an effective and useful person in the world will be expanded.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think there's also a difference between, are you showing this inclusivity because you want to be more profitable, or because you actually want them to feel included?
Yeah.
You may be doing the same thing, but there could be two different reasons for doing it. I guess the real answer is that hopefully they're doing it for both. Yes, you're running a business, of course. Why do you have a business? It's because you want to make money, but hopefully you truly do believe in what you're putting out there as a brand, that you do want these different groups to feel inclusive.
Right.
That's what, and that's where, even as an entrepreneur, even if you don't have that inclusive team per se, it's also about your audience. It's about your vendors, your partners, your community. They all need to be inclusive also if you want your business to succeed.
That's such a great point. And, it occurs to me that I think sometimes people look at their lives as like these separate compartments, but I don't see life that way. I don't think it works that way. So I think, if we're exposing ourselves to diversity in a professional arena, I think it translates into how we interact with the world and our ability to just like be more loving and kind, right, with other people. If we've had different sets of exposure in our personal life, I think that kind of translates into our business. So I think, this idea that we can like segment ourselves is really antithetical, and it just doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. And then I also think, a lot of people sort of approach this work from an intellectual standpoint, like, I'm going to understand everything there is to understand about diversity, and I'm going to read all the books. But I think it really is about like, can we do it from a heart level? Can we, I think about like, okay, I'm creating this product or I'm doing this service, and like, what do I want the person on the other end of this to feel? Like, how do I want my customers to feel? And if you think about that, and then you think, well, these particular subset of customers are going to be they're going to feel really left out if I launch this version of a product, or, I'm not even making space for these people to find my business or want to connect with me. Like, what is that about? How can I? And so I think if we can kind of like take it just out of the purely intellectual and get some information, learn, but like drop down into the heart level and like wanting to connect and wanting to be a servant leader and to lead with love. Like everything works so much better that way.
Right.
I love that. Lead with love. I love it.
Right. And before we move on to the next slide, which we have just a few more, I want you to give us a little shameless plug and tell us about the Demystifying Diversity podcast, because I think it does a really good balance of leading with love and educating from a different perspective than the folks who are just trying to get all the information and learn and learn and learn. This is a different angle. So can you give folks a little bit of feedback on that?
Yeah, it really is. Thank you so much for that, Zach. And I think you vastly underestimated your role in the Demystifying Diversity podcast. So Zach built the website. He does all of our marketing this year. He came on board as a full partner. So like Zach is an amazing source of joy and light, and has done tremendous things. So and I think you vastly underestimated your role in the Demystifying Diversity.
I think we're playing somewhere.
Is there a little glitch? Okay, there's a little glitch. So the Demystifying Diversity podcast, it really looks at diversity through a large and expansive lens. And so in season 1, we dealt with 10 different topics pertaining to diversity. We dealt with biracial identity, Black and Blue. So police officers of color was a topic. Muslims in America and that experience, being Asian in America during the pandemic and all the anti-Asian sentiment that's out there. We did an episode on individuals with disabilities. We did an episode on body diversity, which is something that people don't talk a lot about, right? Like, and sort of fat phobia and shaming that happens there. I mean, just so many interracial marriages, like just so many different topics. And our goal in doing that is that I think that when people can make this stuff personal, it does increase the person's level of investment, right, in the work and in the process. And I also, stories have the ability to change lives. And so in each episode, we interweave, maybe anywhere from 6 to 10 or 12 different individual voices. And it's really like people telling their stories, their experiences of diversity, their what they've gone through, because, I'm not qualified to speak on another person's experience. So I can only tell you what I've been through. I can only tell you what I've witnessed, but I don't know what it feels like to be a member of a community that's other than my own. And so that feels like a really important part of the work. And then something else, this summer, especially this past summer, so many people were reawakened to the importance of diversity and started to be broadened and started to realize, like, oh my gosh, I need to learn more. I need to do better. But then I think it can be hard and scary to know, well, where do I go for the resources? Where do I hear different voices? And I don't want to put that burden on my already marginalized friends or networks, right? And so the Demystifying Diversity podcast is a great space where people can go and listen to a wide variety of voices, a wide variety of stories. I think another thing that sometimes happens is someone who's a member of a certain community that's different than your own, and then somehow that person becomes a representative for every member of their community, right? And so we really worked against that in the Demystifying Diversity podcast by having a number of different voices speak on each topic. So then you get to listen to a variety of different experiences, and you get to kind of open your heart, right, to what's available to you. And so it's been a beautiful and rich and wonderful experience, and it's very, very humbling. But I would encourage people to check out the podcast. And I also wrote a book called Demystifying Diversity, Embracing Our Shared Humanity. And there's a workbook that you can buy as a companion to the book to really figure out, like, okay, well, how do I apply these things to my life? How do I apply them to my relationships, to my business, whatever it is? Because I think it's really about, it's so much deeper than cognition. It's all about application. Like, how do we practice these things? Right.
Awesome. And for folks watching, when we put this on our YouTube, which actually we're live on YouTube now, but we're going to put links to all this stuff in the notes. So if you guys want to check out that book, we'll have those details there. So to jump back into this, let's talk a little bit about this, Derelice. We put this information together. So this is what is needed to build a successful business. Now, give us kind of the rundown of what all this means, and of course, it'll lead to our next step.
Sure, absolutely. So I won't read the bullets, but if we think about businesses that do well, right? They're innovative. So people are they think outside of the box, right? They fill in different needs that might not be being filled in elsewhere. There's an adaptability there. There's a willingness to learn and grow. There's a service element, whether we're providing an actual tangible service or whether we're providing a product, right? We're serving people. And so there's a customer service element and a retention element of wanting customers to come back, wanting them to feel like, as we grow, they can grow with us. There's a flexibility. There's an altruistic element, I think, to good businesses. Yes, at the end of the day, we all care about profitability. We all need to feed our families, but can we look ourselves in the mirror at the end of the day and really know that I feel proud of what I've done, right? And I'm contributing something to this world and to this space. So I think those are just a few of the things that make businesses successful. But notice I didn't say having a really good business plan or a financial strategy, right? And those things matter, but those are not the things that keep businesses running. And as entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs work harder than anybody I know because I'm an entrepreneur, right? We're all kind of workaholics in a way. And so if you're not fueled by the work that you're doing, if you're not fed by it, if it's not sustaining you in some way and you're not seeing the value that you're adding, like there is the burnout that happens, right? And so I think it's very important for entrepreneurs to be motivated by some deeper sense of passion and purpose than a bottom line.
Gotcha. Now, I noticed a lot of correlation when we jumped into the qualities that come from diversity. Can you kind of explain this relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I know we put the slides together, but it was like surprising to me to see this one because it just makes me smile. So yeah, I mean, I think in the same way, right? I'm going to start where I finished off, that like it's deeper than the bottom line with diversity too, right? Like it's about connecting with other people in a way that is really heart-centered and wanting to meet the needs of other people and wanting to serve better and wanting to make people feel included and loved and seeing the value that others bring to the table, right? I mean, I think in business and in our personal lives, right? Like we get into trouble when we think we have all the answers, like everyone, right? We get into trouble when we think I know it all, my way is the only way to see it, right? So much is about being willing to see what I don't see, being willing to understand my own blind spots. And diversity gives us that gift, because just as I brought up the example of the closed captioning, right? Like I wasn't thinking about it because it was outside of the scope of my experience. And so diversity offers moments like that. It offers these, I love that your image is the light bulb, right? Like it's like light bulb after light bulb after light bulb when we're exposing ourselves to people of different races and cultures and religions and traditions and, and ages and genders. Like there's just so much richness that comes from that sort of exposure, that it's so easy to see how that richness would translate into a personal life, into a professional life, into all of these things. And so it really is all about innovation, adaptability, flexibility, and humility, which I think, I'm not always the most humble person out there, but when I am capable of being more humble, I'm a lot more teachable and I learn so much.
Interesting. Awesome.
So I'll tell a quick story that also brings in another type of diversity. Many years ago, YouTube, which we've all used many, many times before, decided to add the function of being able to upload videos to YouTube from your mobile device. And they had a team of engineers that got together and came up with the programming and the functionality and tested it, and everything was great, and they put it out there. And what they were finding was that about 10% of videos being uploaded to YouTube were being uploaded upside down. And they couldn't figure out why. What I didn't tell you is that YouTube's team of engineers happen to be all right-handed people, and our population is about 10% left-handed. And what they realized was left-handed people are holding their phone the opposite way when they're taking video. And they didn't think about that need to rotate the video and have it upload correctly because everyone was right-handed. They were all doing it the same way. And, again, we don't, when we talk about diversity, we don't usually think about left-handed and right-handed. We go to gender and race and all those other things that we've talked about. Well, there was another issue. YouTube's team of engineers was not diverse enough, in the way that they needed to be diverse for this particular function. And obviously they got it figured out and fixed. And I think YouTube has been okay since then. But just a very interesting, another example of, the diversity that's needed on your team.
That's so cool. Kevin, I love that you brought that up. And I think also there's such learning. It's so instructive, right? Like we don't see what we can't see. We don't know what we can't know. And so I think there are bound to be mistakes as we go, especially, that as small business owners, as entrepreneurs, like we're gonna, because YouTube is huge, right? And they made this mistake, and I'm sure they had a large team working on this. But it's also about our ability to respond and react to appropriately, right? So like if YouTube had just said like, oh, well, so, I don't know what's wrong with you 10% of people, but like figure it out on your own, right? I mean, that would have been highly, highly problematic. And I think that sometimes in the diversity space, it's about like, well, how do you react to a customer if they say, you know what, my needs aren't being served? Can you like take a deep breath and say, okay, like, let's figure out what your experience is so that I can be the one to change and adapt so that your experience is the experience that you deserve to have. And I think in a lot of things pertaining to diversity, it doesn't go that way, right? Their experience is invalidated. They're not heard. Their story is considered unimportant. And so I found that in doing this work, some of the most important thing is to just be able to take a deep breath and say like, oh, wow, I didn't see what I didn't see. Thank you so much for bringing that to me. Now let me figure out how to innovate and adapt based on this thing that you're bringing to me that is very valuable and is going to make me capable of serving a larger segment of the population.
Right.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, business, we all make mistakes, and DEI is just one area that we may make mistakes, and it's just all about how do you react to that? How do we, your problem, your issue, your concern has been heard, and we care. We're going to do something about it, and I don't care if that's a segment of the population that we might have missed, or if that's a restaurant sending out a cold appetizer. I mean, it's all the same. Just the problem has been heard, we care, and we're ready to do something about it.
Yeah, and then amending that behavior moving forward too, right? And so hopefully with those engineers, it's like, okay, so now we realize that we weren't thinking about people expansively enough. But then when the next application comes out, when the next thing comes out, how do we, and maybe not only how do we think about people who are left-handed, but like also, is there anyone else that we're leaving out of this, right? Like, so that ability to extrapolate and that ability to think more broadly will save you as a business owner so much time, so much money, so much heartache, so much having to apologize, right? Like just learn from that and kind of carry those lessons forward and try to think more and more and more broadly as we go. And then people will say things like, oh my God, I can't believe they thought to do this. Like, oh my God, they're so innovative. They're so great. They're so cutting edge. And, and a lot of that just comes from being like making mistakes and then falling forward, I think is the Denzel Washington quote, right? Like I've fallen a lot, but I just fall forward. And I think, as entrepreneurs, we need to do that.
And that's why public opinion is so important. Larger companies, they invest in focus groups, that, watch this, use this, read this, whatever it is they need opinions for. Large companies, they can put that investment into it. When you're talking about entrepreneurs and small businesses, maybe you're not investing in putting together focus groups, but you still have friends, you still have people who can test things. I'm in a local Facebook group, and there's a business owner who every time he does updates to his website and every time he puts something, he puts it out to the local Facebook group and says, I'd love to get your opinions. Tell me what you think of this. And guess what? That's not his typical audience. That's reaching everybody. And he doesn't know who's in that group. He may be getting opinions from all sorts of different diversities that he doesn't have in his close network that he's not expecting, but he's getting that opinion before he I guess you could argue it's already on a public level if he's putting it in a public Facebook group, but he's going public on a small scale before he goes public on a larger scale. And it's it doesn't cost him anything, but he's getting the opinions. He's showing that he cares what other people think.
I love that. That's really awesome.
Indeed. So a quick reminder to the folks that are watching, no matter if you're on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, give us some questions for Daralyse, anything related to DEI. We have an expert here who can answer your question adequately and appropriately. So definitely shoot us your questions. We'll ask them here today.
And I think if I heard the bio correctly in the beginning, she's also done some improv at comedy shows. So even if you don't have any questions about DEI, just throw anything out there. Hit it.
We should do a live improv.
Oh gosh, I'm only funny in a group. Like that's what improv is. So I can't.
Well, I think more than 2 people is a couple, 3 people is a group, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Okay, so
we're ready.
You're not throwing me into the improv space today, Kevin. I know you're goofy enough to do it, but I'm out. So tell me a little bit about this. You had a statement saying DEI is a paradigm shift. Explain that a little bit for me, and we have a graphic that goes along with that.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I think it would be great to put that graphic up. Yeah. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier when I was talking about the intersection of identities and holding a number of different identities as people. But I think this is just helpful to kind of look and see like, oh wow, and these are all just like a few, right? There are so many more things that make us who we are, but all these different things kind of combine, right, to make our individual personality. There's religion, there's age, which we're always moving up and down the spectrum or up the spectrum of age, right? There's race, there's ethnicity, there's gender, there's disability, there's sexual identity, there's economic status. So there's all these different things that kind of make us who we are at a given point and time, and most of these things are malleable. Most of these things are flexible. They're somewhat, our personality rather, and our influences are able to be changed. Some of our identity markers are fixed, but some of them are more fluid. And so I think that when we can start to see that who we are is important and that we matter and that we have value, but that also we're not everything and we don't have access to all experiences. Like when I can start to see that as an individual person, it makes me really need and crave diversity, because I recognize like, oh, this is the only realm that I operate in. Like, I don't know Kevin's realm. I don't know Zach's realm. And so suddenly I become hungry to learn about other people. I become hungry to sort of like bring other people into my world and my space who have different experiences and different identities than my own, because I realize that like, oh, if I stay in this small little box, in this container of me, or maybe just expand the container to be me and other people who I perceive to be the same as me, right? Like I'm really not gonna expand my effectiveness as a person. I'm not gonna change. I'm not gonna grow. I won't have a bigger worldview. So if we can really understand that, like, oh, okay, my identity is malleable and it's flexible in certain ways, but it's also limited, well, then we start to really seek out more and more identities and experiences and opportunities and people, not looking to change ourselves necessarily, but recognizing that we don't have all the answers within ourselves and we can't possibly do everything that's needed in this world alone and with people surrounding us who are exactly like us.
Got it. Got you. One question I have, because again, I don't have a firm example of someone I know who's in this situation, but what if you have someone who is basically not putting any energy or effort into creating their business in a more diverse way because, and their rationale is, my clientele or my, target demographic is this. It's nothing outside of this. And this demographic does not include the realm of diversity. What's the conversation you'd have with that individual to kind of let them know that it is still important to take all these other elements into effect, even though your target market might not be that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I have an example from my own life. Many years ago, or I guess maybe 5-6 years ago now, I went to a writers' conference, and this writers' conference, it was wonderful. It was great, but it was predominantly attended by white individuals who were all elderly, right? And it was great. Like they'd been in business for maybe like 20 something years, really serving their client base. That writers' conference is no longer in operation because, their client base sort of started to decline. And then all of a sudden, they had this product, but no one was showing up anymore, right? And so I think that's just one example of, imagine how different it would have been if they were bringing in younger writers, people of color, individuals with disabilities, just like people from different stratospheres, because then when they notice like, oh, okay, a certain part of our population, I stuttered a little bit there, but a certain part of our population is no longer attending or is no longer, able to participate in the same way, I think they would have been able to really style shift and to bring in kind of more and new and different people. And so, I think that's something I think for business owners sometimes, like, to think about, well, what legacy do you want to leave? Because I think most people who have like children, let's say, maybe they want to leave a business behind to their kids. They want to leave a business behind to their family members. And so, if they're thinking not just about me and what population am I serving, but they think about like, well, if all these other businesses are going to be more diverse and are growing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, do I really want to, even if I'm doing fine, do I really want to leave behind a business to my kids that is probably going to be unsustainable? Because as diversity grows, we're going to become dinosaurs, right? In our industry, whatever that industry is. So I think sometimes you can use a person's own self-interest to remind them of the fact that, like, no, actually, it's really great to be thinking more expansively than just the now. Because and the other thing is, like, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So, like, I think 2008, the financial industry crashed, right? So that's a good example of like, if someone was working in that industry and thinking like, okay, well, this is all I have to do and this is all I have to be good at, and these are the only people I have to surround myself with, well, then what happens when you lose your job, when your industry goes belly up? Like, it's a problem, right? And so I think the more that we have richness and the more we have diversity, it's almost like you're weaving yourself a safety net in a lot of different ways. You're creating these relationships that you might leverage later on. Like, there's such a personal investment in doing this work that is so important. And that's not why I do this work. It's a fringe benefit. I do this work because I feel called to it. I do this work because I care about people. But like, I don't think I'll ever be in a position where I won't be able to serve someone somewhere in some way in my professional life.
Got you. And last call for any questions if folks watching have anything. I know Kevin always says when we don't get questions, that means our guest is explaining things impeccably. So I appreciate you for that, Daralyse. I'll throw one thing out there, and this is more a question for you, Kevin. How have you seen this, greater focus on DEI affect marketing and affect what our clients ask for and what we would offer them as a service? I mean, I know, between us, we've even had conversations with companies that are now focusing specifically on diversity as it pertains to your website. So like, what are some of the things that you're coming across, or some of the things that we're doing at Navitas to focus on the DEI aspect of businesses growing in their marketing?
Yeah. I think some of it's, the more obvious answers, when you're putting graphics on your website, you're putting graphics in your brochure. We want to make sure that we're visually being inclusive of, you have to have the white people, the black people, the Asian people, we want to show that variety. And sometimes you question, are they, unfortunately you question, are they just fulfilling a requirement, or, is there a deeper meaning behind why they're doing that? One thing that's disappointing for anybody who contributes to stock photo websites, here's your tip. We need a lot more diversity on stock photos. It's shocking. Here we are in year 2020, 2021, and the difficulty we have sometimes finding what should be such mainstream, simple stock photos. Once you get away from just the stereotypical white family, white couple, white medical patients, whatever it might be, it's shocking the lack of diversity that's available.
Funny on that, Kevin, to piggyback on that. So having done some websites and different things, I type in business professional. If I just type in business professional and don't put the word black, every business professional is white. If I then go black business professional, there's like 4 or 5 groups of photographies that have done like shoots. So like, I see these black business professionals on a lot of websites, like, and I know it's the same person. Like, these people are becoming famous by being this stock image, but that's because there's not enough diversity even in that space. So I fully agree with what you're saying, and it is frustrating.
It's shocking.
Make more.
It's shocking that's still an issue. With website development, one of the things that we talk about is ADA compliance, which is the American Disability Act, and disabilities, of course, can cover such a wide range of topics. What is a disability, or just a different ability? Who are we to call it a disability? It's just a different ability than what we're used to. But people read websites in different ways, and so, it could be color contrast that needs to be adjusted, and maybe font size that needs to be adjusted. They say over 98% of websites are not ADA compliant, and sure you're at risk of a lawsuit, but don't you also want to just do it for the right reasons, which is just being inclusive of people and making sure that when someone comes to your website, they can see what it is they need to see and read what they need to read. Or again, if you're purely driven by dollars and cents, from a PR perspective, doesn't it look good showing that you have those other options for people who are in need of a different type of way to receive your information, even if I'm not the one that needs to receive it that way? Isn't it great that, today, how do we put our message out? We've got blog posts, we've got videos, we've got podcasts. One of the things is, how do people want to receive their message? But the flip side of that, which relates more to DEI, is how do people need to receive that message? You may listen to podcasts because you like it. I may listen to podcasts because I have no other choice. So, it's great that, you're offering that type of diversity also, just in the way that you deliver your message.
I love that you brought that up, Kevin. I think, there's an author, Rudine Bishop, who talks about the importance of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors in our society and in representation. And so what that alludes to is that, like, mirrors are seeing ourselves reflected, right? So we want to see ourselves reflected, whether it be in media, on websites, in marketing. We want to see people who look like us, who have similar experiences as us. And then we also want windows. It's so important. It's so important for personal development, for children, for anyone to be able to look into cultures, experiences, religions, races other than their own as an outsider, and sort of get a bit of a perspective on an experience that is different than theirs. And then it's important to have sliding glass doors. Where can I walk into where you are, and where can you enter into my world, and how can we sort of be in relationship with each other? And so I think all these things are so critical. And if you're a person who always is seeing themselves represented, that's probably not that healthy, right? It's probably not that good. And if you're a person who's never seeing themselves represented, it's also not healthy, and it's also not good. And they've done studies, like the suicide rate in Indigenous communities dropped after sports teams that had appropriative names and symbols did away with that, right? The suicide rates in nearby Native communities dropped. So these are really important things. And same thing with members of trans youth, right? For them not seeing themselves represented, it leads to higher levels of depression and suicidal ideation and all of these things. And so really, it's so personally important to do this work, even if it is in a professional arena. It makes a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, folks, this has been pretty awesome. I'm super excited. That mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors. I'm gonna watch that back, learn it, because I like that analogy a lot. We might have to make a clip just of that.
I was going to say, when we create those isolated clips, that's one of them right there.
100%. So again, a big thank you to you, Daralyse, for joining us today. For all the folks watching, a quick heads up. We have our next two coming up. We're going to talk about some common legal hurdles for small business with my guy, Michael Adler, Madler, as many call him. And then after that, in April, we're kicking off April with Content for Sellers with Chris Nelson, who's a good buddy of mine. He's a realtor, and really, I'm a content creator. I see the stuff he makes. I'm like, this guy has it. So I want him to talk to other realtors and other people that focus on sales about how do you create content, especially in these days where content is king, because we're not networking in person. You need something to put out there to show who you are. But before we fully leave today, Daralyse, can you tell folks a little bit about how to get in contact with you, what they should follow?
Thank you so much. So I love hearing from people. I want to hear your story. You heard way too much out of me. But you can find me on DaralyseLyons.com, or demystifyingdiversitypodcast.com. And on either of those websites, there are links to my Facebook and Instagram and the Demystifying Diversity podcast Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook and all that jazz. So just go to one of those two websites. There's contact. You can contact me through either of them. And I'm looking forward to hearing from people.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us, Daralyse. Thank you for all the folks who have watched. Of course, we'll bombard you with clips and more footage from this in the near future on our social platforms. But again, thank you, and tune in 2 weeks for another episode of Thursday Thoughts. Peace.